Welcome to All in All. You know that old saying, the simplest solution is usually the correct one?
Oh, yeah, you hear it all the time.
It's like everywhere. People trot it out as this piece of instant wisdom, right? A shortcut to thinking smart.
Exactly. It feels intuitive.
Yeah.
Simple must be better.
But what if that very common understanding, which, let's face it, is incredibly appealing, what if it actually glosses over some really crucial nuances?
Nuances of a principle that shape, well, centuries of thought.
Exactly. And what if applying it casually, without thinking, can even be, profoundly misleading?
That's a big risk.
So today, we're embarking on a deep dive. We're really going to explore Occam's razor. It's this mental model that has, well, quite literally sliced and shaped how we understand things across almost every field you can imagine.
It really has. And it's a concept that, yeah, it feels instinctively right. But like you said, its real power, its usefulness, it comes from applying it precisely, not just throwing around a vague generalization.
Right.
So our mission today, I guess, is to unpack its true meaning. Let's try to get beyond that really simplistic take and explore its origins, which are actually quite surprising.
Yeah, and look at how it's applied, and maybe just as importantly, sometimes misapplied in places like, cutting-edge science, modern medicine.
Even AI, technology, and just, well, your everyday decisions, how you figure stuff out.
That's the plan. By the end of this deep dive, hopefully, you'll not only grasp the fascinating history behind it and why it's still so relevant practically,
But also get a handle on some of the lively debates, the arguments about its limits, because it does have limits.
Absolutely. The goal is to give you a clearer, more informed perspective. So, you'll never look at simplicity in quite the same way again.
Let's do it. Time to really dig into this.
The historical blade origin and early forms of Occam's razor.
Okay, so to really get Occam's razor, we need to, jump in the time machine. We're going back to the 14th century.
To meet the man himself. Or the man whose name got attached to it anyway.
Exactly. William of Occam. He was an English Franciscan friar, a really big deal as a theologian, and a super influential nominalist philosopher.
Nominalist meaning he was skeptical about abstract concepts, focusing more on individual things.
Right. And what's fascinating is while this whole principle, this maxim of parsimony, is universally linked to him now,
Everyone calls it Occam's razor.
he didn't exactly, invent the basic logic of simplicity from scratch. It wasn't totally new.
No, definitely not. The core idea had roots stretching back, well, centuries before Occam was even around.
So what was his specific angle then? Why does his name stick?
That's a really vital distinction. William of Occam's contribution, his big push, was this really fervent insistence on logical parsimony, especially within his theological and philosophical arguments.
Okay.
See, he was working in this intellectual climate, scholastic philosophy, which was incredibly complex. Lots of layers, lots of entities being proposed.
Right, the stereotype is counting angels on pinheads, that kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. It involved very elaborate systems. And Occam felt that often these systems added unnecessary concepts, extra entities, just to explain things, but without actually making the explanations better or more predictive.
So complexity for complexity's sake, maybe.
That was his critique, basically. He famously challenged this tendency. He argued for a much more streamlined approach to thinking, to explaining things.
And that's where the famous Latin phrase comes in.
Exactly. He put it very succinctly. Nunquam ponenda est pluralitas sine necessitate.
Which translates to?
Plurality must never be posited without necessity.
Plurality. So multiple things, multiple entities or explanations.
Exactly. Don't multiply them, don't add more layers, unless you absolutely have to, unless it's necessary.
So don't make things more complicated than they need to be, essentially.
Precisely. He used this like a tool, or a really powerful tool, to sort of prune away all that philosophical excess he saw, arguing against adding explanations or entities beyond what was strictly required by logic or evidence.
Plurality must never be posited without necessity. That phrasing really does capture something deeper, doesn't it? It's not just keep it simple. It's about cutting out the unnecessary.
Yes, the superfluous. That's key.
And the whole razor metaphor, where did that come from? Because it sounds quite, sharp, like you're cutting something away.
It does, doesn't it? And it's a really fitting image, I think. The term razor captures its purpose perfectly. Like a mental tool, right? For distinguishing between different hypotheses by, shaving away the unnecessary assumptions.
Like a barber trimming a beard.
Yeah, or maybe even like a surgeon's scalpel. Cutting precisely, getting rid of what's not needed to get to the core of the issue. It's about refining, about reaching the most economical, maybe even the most elegant explanation.
Elegant. I like that. But I seem to remember hearing about another interpretation of razor from back then. Something a bit gentler, maybe more artistic.
Ah, you're touching on a really fascinating bit of linguistic history there.
Yes.
The Latin word novacula.
Novak.
It can mean a barber's razor, absolutely. But it also referred to something else. A writer's scraping knife.
A scraping knife, like for fixing mistakes.
Exactly. Think about the medieval scriptoria, where monks and scribes were meticulously copying manuscripts by hand. These little knives were essential tools.
What did they use them for?
For polishing the text, for carefully scraping away errors on the parchment without ruining the page, ensuring the wording was elegant, concise, and crucially, for economizing, for making sure the writing was efficient.
Wow. So not just cutting, but refining, polishing.
Precisely. This interpretation highlights a more methodical approach, aiming for intellectual elegance and efficiency, not just blunt removal. It's about getting clarity through precision, like a skilled scribe carefully perfecting a text.
That's a much richer image, I think, the writer's knife. It really shifts the perspective from just, tossing stuff out to carefully crafting something concise and accurate.
It does. It suggests care and attention to detail.
And this underlying idea, preferring simpler, more economical explanations, Occam wasn't alone in this, right? You said it had older roots, ancient echoes even.
Oh, absolutely. The basic notion of parsimony, the idea that fewer assumptions are generally better, you can trace that back thousands of years.
Like who?
Well, Aristotle, for instance, back in ancient Greece, in his foundational works, like Physics and On the Heavens, he laid out a remarkably similar idea. He suggested something like, the more limited, if adequate, is always preferable.
So if a simpler explanation works just as well.
Go with the simpler one. Aristotle believed in nature itself operates in the most efficient way possible. So our explanations of nature should mirror that efficiency.
That makes sense. Even back then, philosophers grappling with the big questions of the universe were already leaning towards, elegance and economy in their theories.
Precisely. And then fast forward a few centuries, you have Ptolemy, the great Greek astronomer, famous for his Earth-centered model of the universe.
The Ptolemaic system.
Right. He explicitly used this principle in his work. He stated, "It is a good principle to explain phenomena by the simplest hypothesis available." He was trying to figure out the really intricate movements of the planets.
Which looked pretty complicated from Earth.
They did. And even then, the quest for simplicity was a guiding principle. Although, as we might discuss later, his application of it led to its own kind of complexity with all those epicycles.
Right, the circles within circles. Okay. And was there anyone closer to Occam's own time who picked up this thread, expanding on the idea of intellectual efficiency?
Yes, definitely. Robert Grosseteste. He was a really influential English thinker, a statesman and philosopher back in the 1200s, so a bit before Occam.
And what did he add?
He built directly on Aristotle's ideas. He argued that that is better and more valuable, which requires fewer, other circumstances being equal.
Fewer premises, basically.
Fewer premises, fewer assumptions. He elaborated that if you can demonstrate something using fewer, equally well-known starting points, that's better, because it leads to knowledge more quickly, more certainly. He saw this as a universal principle applying to natural science, moral philosophy, metaphysics, everywhere.
So it wasn't about being lazy, it was about optimizing your thinking, getting to the understanding faster and more reliably.
Exactly. Intellectual efficiency. Optimizing your mental energy to get to the truth, or the best explanation, with the greatest dispatch.
It really does sound like this deeply intuitive principle that just kept popping up with thinkers across different times and cultures. They just gravitated towards it.
It seems so.
And yet the actual name, Occam's razor, that specific phrase, it didn't actually get coined until way, way later, right? Which is kind of weird.
It is a fascinating historical quirk, isn't it? The term itself, Occam's razor, was only formally attributed to Occam much later, by the Scottish philosopher Sir William Hamilton in 1852.
1852, that's like 500 years after Occam?
Roughly, yeah. And even before Hamilton, there was a scholar in the 16th century, Liber Freudmont.
Okay.
He actually coined the slogan Occam's razor, but he used it as a criticism.
A criticism of
Occam.
Yes. A criticism of the nominalist school that Occam was part of. Freudmont thought Occam's careful distinctions were actually reducing things too much, making philosophy too sparse.
So the name started out almost as an insult, or at least a critique.
In a way, yes. It wasn't necessarily a compliment initially. It just goes to show how powerful Occam's phrasing, plurality must not be posited without necessity, really became. It endured, took on a life of its own, even beyond its original, somewhat controversial context, until Hamilton cemented the name centuries later.
Sharpening the principle what Occam's razor truly means.
Okay, so we've traced its pretty impressive history, and we kind of get the spirit of the razor metaphor, whether it's for shaving or scraping. But now, let's really, sharpen this blade, because that popular understanding, the simplest solution is usually the correct one. That's really just scratching the surface, isn't it? Oh, absolutely. It's a massive oversimplification, and this is where we hit the crucial distinction. Getting this right really empowers you to use this mental model way more effectively.
So what is the core idea then, if not just simple is best?
Occam's razor isn't really about conceptual simplicity. It's not about what feels easy to grasp or, visualize right away. It's fundamentally about making fewer unnecessary assumptions.
Fewer assumptions, okay.
Yes. A simple hypothesis in the true Occam spirit is one that minimizes the number of unproven entities or postulates you need to accept. It's not necessarily the one that's easiest to explain in a sentence.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge difference. So let me try an example, like the flat Earth theory.
Go on.
On the surface, that might seem conceptually simpler than a round Earth, right?
Yeah.
Just a flat plane, people walk around, no weird curves or gravity pulling sideways.
They might feel simpler initially, yeah.
But based on your definition, Occam's razor would actually disfavor the flat Earth idea, even though the concept feels kind of straightforward.
You've nailed a perfect example of what we might call deceptive simplicity. While a flat Earth might appear conceptually simpler at first glance, think about what you need to add to make it fit what we actually observe.
Like what?
Well, why do ships disappear hull first over the horizon? You'd have to invent some kind of special visual distortion effect. How do you explain different time zones across the world simultaneously? You need a really complex, maybe localized light source theory. Why don't people fall off the edge? Why does gravity seem to pull straight down everywhere, even near the supposed edge?
You'd need totally new physics, basically. Lots of extra stuff.
Exactly. All these extra explanations, these ad hoc additions, assumptions made just to patch the holes. With no independent evidence, they make the flat Earth theory incredibly complex in terms of the number of unproven ideas you have to swallow.
So it's loaded with hidden assumptions.
Tons of them. Which makes it far less parsimonious, far less simple in the Occam sense than the spherical Earth model. The spherical Earth plus universal gravitation explains all those things. Ships disappearing, time zones, gravity, with a much smaller set of core assumptions. Even if visualizing a sphere feels a bit more complex initially.
Okay, that makes sense. The real insight then is that the razor isn't a shortcut to an easy answer.
Not at all.
It's more like a disciplined tool that forces you to be intellectually honest about what you're assuming.
Precisely. If your simple explanation requires you to sweep a whole bunch of unexamined complexities under the rug, it's not truly simple, it's just deceptive.
So it's definitely not a shortcut to truth then. It sounds more like a practical guide, a heuristic maybe, not like a scientific law.
That's exactly the right way to think about it.
Yeah.
Occam's razor is a rule of thumb. It's a heuristic device, a guiding principle. It is not a scientific axiom or some kind of logical deduction that guarantees you'll find the absolute truth.
So it doesn't say a theory is more likely to be true just because it's simpler?
Nope. It doesn't make that claim. Its value is fundamentally pragmatic, practical. It's a powerful tool for making decisions, especially when you're trying to choose between different competing explanations, particularly when other factors are equal.
Ah, okay. We'll get to that all else being equal bit. But it helps navigate uncertainty.
Yes, by pushing us towards models or explanations that are generally easier to test, easier to potentially prove wrong, which is a good thing in science, and easier to build upon. It sort of safeguards us against getting stuck on unnecessary or worse, untestable assumptions.
That brings up a really critical point, though, that condition all else being equal. When does the razor actually apply? Because let's be honest, in the real world, all else is almost never perfectly equal.
That's a very astute point and a crucial clarification. The razor is most powerful, most directly applicable when you have two or more competing theories or explanations that make exactly the same predictions, or at least they do an equally good job of describing and predicting all the evidence you currently have.
Okay, so two theories explain the data equally well.
Then, in that specific situation, the one that requires fewer additional unproven assumptions is provisionally preferred.
Provisionally. So not definitively better, just preferred for now.
Exactly. And that preference is often driven by practical or what philosophers call non-epistemic reasons Reasons not directly tied to truth. Like, it might be easier to test the simpler theory, it might be clearer conceptually, or it might just be about using resources efficiently.
Like funding. It's easier to get money to test a simpler idea.
Often, yes. If Theory A requires building a giant billion-dollar collider, and Theory B requires looking through a telescope, and both currently explain the available data equally well, the razor nudges you pragmatically to check Theory B first. It's often cheaper, faster, easier to potentially disprove.
Okay, let's use that classic lightning example.
Mm-hmm.
If Theory 1 is lightning is caused by electrical discharge in clouds,
Okay.
and Theory 2 is lightning is caused by electrical discharge in clouds and Zeus throwing thunderbolts.
Right.
And let's say, just for argument's sake, both perfectly explain the visible flash and bang, then Theory 1 is provisionally better according to the razor.
Yes, precisely.
Not because it proves Zeus doesn't exist,
No, the razor doesn't prove or disprove existence like that.
but because adding Zeus is an extra assumption, an extra entity, that doesn't actually improve the explanation of the lightning itself, given the current evidence.
You've got it. In that hypothetical vacuum, without any other independent evidence for Zeus's lightning-related activities, the first explanation assumes less. It's more parsimonious. The razor encourages you to start there.
And then, if that simpler explanation turns out to be wrong, or not enough.
Then you start considering the more complex alternatives. It helps filter the possibilities, making the process of investigation more manageable, but it never slams the door on complexity if the evidence demands it.
Gotcha. And it seems like even the word simplicity itself isn't that. Well, simple. You mentioned different kinds, like ontological versus syntactic. Could you unpack that a bit? Because simple can feel pretty slippery.
Absolutely. And the fact that simplicity itself can be complex adds another layer of nuance to applying the razor. So ontological parsimony, that's about minimizing the number of things, the number of entities or types of entities that your theory postulates.
Like fewer ingredients in the explanation.
Exactly. Like maybe assuming fewer fundamental particles in physics or fewer types of mental states in psychology, fewer things you have to believe exist.
Okay. And syntactic.
Syntactic simplicity is more about the structure of the theory itself.
Right.
How complex are its laws or equations? How many logical steps does it take? How, elegant is it? Think of it like the recipe instructions. Are they concise and clear or convoluted and messy?
I see. So a theory could have fewer ingredients but really complicated instructions, or vice versa.
Precisely. You might have a theory that's ontologically simple. Maybe it just posits one fundamental force but requires incredibly complex mathematics, massive syntactic complexity to actually make predictions.
Or the other way around.
Or you could have a theory with several different forces, ontologically more complex, but where the rules governing each force are relatively straightforward, syntactically simpler.
So applying the razor isn't always straightforward. You might have to decide which kind of simplicity matters more.
Exactly. It often involves a degree of judgment. And it also raises the danger of fake simplicity, using a single word or concept, like maybe consciousness or instinct, that sounds simple, but actually bundles together a whole lot of unexplained complexity.
Right, just giving a complex thing a simple name doesn't actually make the explanation simpler.
Not fundamentally. This is why finding a single, objective, universally agreed upon way to measure simplicity is really, really hard. And why applying the razor thoughtfully always requires critical thinking, not just automatic application.
Cutting through complexity impact and applications across fields.
This more nuanced understanding, it really changes how you see the razor's role in the world. It's everywhere, but maybe not always used quite right. Let's dive into its impact, starting with the big one. Science. It sounds like it's less of a strict rule and more of an essential guide.
It really is. An incredibly powerful guiding principle that shapes how scientists think, how they build theories, how they evaluate competing ideas.
How does it help in practice?
Well, one key role is helping distinguish rigorous science from, say, pseudoscience or superstition. The razor pushes against explanations that multiply entities without good reason, invoking things like, invisible energy fields or angels, or complex conspiracies, when a more straightforward explanation based on known principles works just as well.
So it favors testable explanations grounded in fewer unsupported assumptions.
Exactly. If a theory needs to keep inventing ad hoc patches, those extra bits added just to fix holes when new evidence comes in, without any independent justification, that's a huge red flag from an Occam's razor perspective. It signals that the core idea might be flawed. Science aims for explanations that are robust, testable, and built on the leanest possible foundation of assumptions.
And you can see this influence playing out throughout scientific history, right? You mentioned Copernicus earlier and Einstein. Let's revisit Copernicus. His idea, the Earth going around the sun, it wasn't immediately more accurate at predicting things, was it? So why did it eventually win out? How did the razor factor in?
That's one of the classic, most compelling examples, the old system, the Ptolemaic geocentric model with Earth stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
It had become unbelievably complicated over the centuries. To explain why planets sometimes look like they move backward in the sky, that retrograde motion.
Which they wouldn't do if they just circled the Earth smoothly.
Exactly. So the Ptolemaic system had to add more and more epicycles. These were basically little circles whose centers moved along bigger circles. It got incredibly convoluted.
Like adding gears to a clockwork model that wasn't quite working.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And these epicycles felt arbitrary, kind of physically nonsensical. They were just tacked on to make the observations fit the Earth-centered assumption. It became this huge, unwieldy Rube Goldberg machine of a cosmos.
Okay, so it was just layers and layers of complexity added to prop up a potentially flawed core idea.
Pretty much. Now, Copernicus comes along. His heliocentric model sun in the center, it wasn't perfect initially. He still assumed perfect circular orbits, which aren't quite right, so his raw predictions weren't instantly better across the board.
So why was it preferred by people like Kepler and Galileo?
Because, as they realized, it circumvents all that is superfluous and discordant, as Copernicus himself put it. By shifting the viewpoint to the sun, it elegantly explained that apparent retrograde motion simply as an effect of Earth overtaking slower outer planets, or being overtaken by faster inner ones. It dramatically reduced the need for those huge, arbitrary epicycles.
So it got rid of a whole layer of unnecessary complexity.
A massive layer. While Copernicus still needed some small adjustments, turns out orbits are ellipses, not circles, his system was fundamentally simpler in its core assumptions about how the solar system was structured. It had a conceptual elegance, a parsimony, that deeply appealed to scientists looking for a more harmonious, less contrived explanation.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, now fast forward to Einstein, his famous quote. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. That sounds like he had a very careful relationship with simplicity.
He absolutely did. A very profound statement that captures the razor's double edge, right? You need simplicity, but not oversimplification.
How did he apply it in his work?
Well, it's interesting. Einstein's early work, say on special relativity, was very focused on empirical evidence, on making sure it matched observations precisely. He sometimes even criticized colleagues for prioritizing mathematical elegance over fitting the data.
So, data first.
Initially, yes. But as he developed his ideas, especially with general relativity, he came to realize something crucial. He saw that the most powerful, most encompassing theories often arise when you discover a logically simple mathematical condition, a core principle that can explain a vast range of different phenomena.
Like finding the simple root that generates all the complex branches.
Exactly. It relates to what scientists sometimes call the inverse problem. It's relatively easy to start with a simple rule and generate complex outcomes. But it's incredibly hard to look at complex, messy observations and work backward to find the simple underlying rule that explains it all.
So Occam's razor for Einstein became a tool for that search, for the fundamental simplicity.
Yes. It guided his search for the minimal set of principles, the most parsimonious foundation that can generate the complexity we observe in the universe, rather than just finding a superficially simple description that might ignore awkward facts. His field equations for general relativity, while mathematically sophisticated,
Definitely not simple math.
no, but the underlying conceptual framework is remarkably simple and elegant. It provides a profoundly parsimonious explanation for gravity as curved spacetime, replacing the more complex Newtonian idea of forces acting at a distance.
So digging down to the elegant core, how does this kind of thinking show up in science today, beyond these big historical figures?
It's deeply woven into modern scientific practice, especially in areas like statistics and machine learning, where people build models from data. A great example is something called Bayesian inference.
Okay, what's that in simple terms?
Well, imagine you have two different models trying to explain some data. Model A is really flexible. It has lots of adjustable knobs, lots of parameters. It can twist itself to fit almost any data you feed it, even if it's just random noise.
Okay, like it's overfitting.
Exactly. Model B, on the other hand, has fewer knobs, fewer parameters. It's more constrained. Its predictions are sharper, more specific.
Right.
Bayesian inference provides a mathematical way to quantify our preference. It naturally favors Model B, the simpler one, because its sharp predictions are considered stronger evidence if they match the data. The flexible model fitting everything doesn't tell you as much. It's a mathematical embodiment of Occam's razor.
So the math itself prefers simpler, more precise models.
Yes, because simpler models, in this sense, tend to be more testable, more robust, and better at generalizing to new data. It pushes scientists towards explanations that are not just accurate for the data they have, but also efficiently powerful.
That's a fantastic practical link. Okay, let's shift gears completely. What about medicine? How does Occam's razor play out in diagnosing patients where things can get really complicated?
It's definitely a cornerstone in clinical diagnostics. You often hear the saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
All right, look for the common explanation first.
Exactly. Occam's razor guides clinicians to look for the single, simplest explanation that can account for all the patient's symptoms. So if someone comes in with, say, a fever, a cough, and body aches,
Yeah.
the razor suggests thinking first about one underlying illness that causes all those things, like maybe the flu. It pushes against jumping to conclusions like, oh, they must have pneumonia and a separate viral infection and maybe chronic fatigue syndrome, all at the same time.
So it helps to streamline the diagnostic process, avoid getting lost in too many possibilities right away.
That's the goal. Lead to a quicker, more efficient diagnosis and treatment plan. Start with the most probable, most parsimonious explanation.
I imagine there must be cases where sticking too rigidly to that simplest explanation can be dangerous, especially in medicine. I think I've heard about a tragic case, the Josie King story.
Yes, the Josie King story is. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and it serves as a very powerful, very sobering illustration of how misapplying the razor can have devastating consequences. Josie was a little girl, just 18 months old, admitted to Johns Hopkins, a top hospital, after suffering severe burns in a bath. She was recovering, but then started showing signs of distress, high fever, intense thirst.
Okay.
Tragically, she died from a severe bloodstream infection caused by her central line catheter. But this infection was missed. The medical team, perhaps guided too rigidly by Occam's razor, kept focusing on what seemed like simpler, more obvious explanations related to her burns, like dehydration or maybe electrolyte imbalances.
Even though she was getting worse, and her mother was raising alarms.
Yes. Her mother repeatedly voiced concerns that something was terribly wrong, that Josie wasn't acting right. But the team remained fixated on the initial, simpler diagnoses. They failed to adequately consider or investigate the possibility of a rapidly progressing infection, which might have seemed like a more complex explanation at the time, another problem on top of the burns until it was too late.
That's awful. A fixation on the simple explanation blinded them to the real fatal problem.
It seems that way. It highlights how, in a dynamic, complex system like the human body, failing to remain open to alternative, even if seemingly more complex, possibilities can be catastrophic, especially when new symptoms or evidence emerge.
And the irony you mentioned earlier, about the solution.
Yes, the profound irony is that Dr. Peter Pronovost, also at Hopkins, later championed a remarkably simple solution to prevent these very catheter infections. A basic 5-step checklist for doctors and nurses to follow during insertion. Things like washing hands, using full barrier precautions.
Super simple steps.
Incredibly simple, yet proven to dramatically reduce infection rates. It was a simple solution to a complex problem, but implementing it required overcoming the previous simpler assumption that such infections were just an unavoidable risk.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. So in these complex medical situations, just blindly applying the razor can be really dangerous. Is there like a counter principle, an anti-razor for medicine?
Yes, there is, and it's a really vital counterpoint, especially now. It's called Occam's dictum.
Occam's dictum.
Yes, and it basically states, patients can have as many diseases as they damn well please.
Okay, much more direct.
It's a crucial reminder, an anti-razor, particularly important in today's world with aging populations and polymorbidity, where patients often do have multiple chronic conditions simultaneously. Diabetes, heart disease, kidney problems.
Right. You can't just assume it's all caused by one thing.
Exactly. Applying Occam's razor too rigidly in those cases can lead you to miss things. You might attribute symptoms from a new secondary illness to one of the patient's existing conditions, leading to misdiagnosis or delayed treatment.
So you need both principles in your toolkit.
Absolutely. And Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA,
Yeah.
he famously warned that Occam's razor can be a very dangerous implement in biology because biological systems, shaped by evolution, are often incredibly complex, sometimes even irreducibly complex, meaning removing one part breaks the whole thing. Evolution doesn't always find the simplest solution, just one that works.
So simpler isn't always better or even correct in biology.
Often, No. Crick worried about a tyranny of simple explanations, blinding us to the actual intricate reality. Sometimes the complex explanation is the right one simply because the underlying reality is complex. You need to be willing to embrace that.
A really important balance to strike. Okay, let's pivot again to a different kind of complexity. Artificial intelligence and technology. How does Occam's razor fit into that world?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental in AI and machine learning, especially when you're building models that learn from data. The razor is a key guide for developing and evaluating algorithms.
No, so.
It strongly promotes simplicity and reduced complexity in the models themselves. Why? Because similar models tend to be more efficient computationally. They're often easier for humans to understand and interpret, which is increasingly important. And critically, they tend to be better at generalizing.
Generalizing, meaning they work on new data they haven't seen before? That sounds crucial for AI.
It's absolutely crucial. This helps prevent a major problem in machine learning called overfitting.
Right, you mentioned that with the Bayesian example.
Exactly. Imagine you're training an AI to recognize pictures of cats. An overfitted model is one that essentially memorizes the specific cats in your training pictures. It learns all their exact fur patterns, the exact angle of their whiskers in those photos. It becomes incredibly complex, full of very specific rules.
So it would be great at recognizing those cats again, but terrible with new ones.
Precisely. A simpler, more parsimonious model, guided by Occam's razor, tries to learn the essential features of catness, pointy ears, furry texture, general-shaped things that apply to all cats, even ones it's never encountered.
Yep.
It extracts the underlying pattern, not just the noise in the training data.
And those simply models perform better in the real world.
Generally, yes. They show much better generalization capability. They perform well on unseen data, which is what you need if you want your cat detector or your medical diagnosis AI or your self-driving car to actually work reliably out in the wild. Techniques used in training AI, like regularization, are direct computational methods to enforce Occam's razor. They literally penalize models for being too complex.
So engineers are actively building the razor into the learning process.
They are. It's a core principle for building robust, reliable AI.
That makes total sense. Is there even like a formal mathematical basis for this in computer science?
Yes, there is. Occam's razor has been formalized mathematically in several ways. Perhaps the most famous is Solomonov's theory of optimal inductive inference.
Solomonov. Okay. Sounds complex.
The details are, but the core idea is actually quite elegant. It basically provides a quantitative framework based on probability and information theory for why we should favor simpler explanations when learning from data. It suggests that simpler algorithms or models, those describable with shorter computer programs, are inherently more probable and thus should be preferred when making predictions about the future based on past data.
So math backs up the intuition that simpler explanations are somehow more likely.
In a very specific, rigorous sense, yes. It gives a powerful theoretical underpinning to why parsimony isn't just a philosophical preference, but a mathematically sound strategy for building intelligent systems that can learn effectively.
Fascinating stuff. But this isn't just for PhDs in computer science or philosophy, right? How does Occam's razor actually apply to, us? In everyday decision-making, maybe even boosting productivity, we all deal with complex choices and information overload.
Absolutely. In daily life, it's really about making choices, forming beliefs, and solving problems in a way that involves fewer unnecessary leaps of faith, fewer unproven assumptions. It encourages a kind of intellectual economy.
Intellectual economy, I like that.
Yeah. So back to the hoofbeats example. If you hear clopping outside your window and you live in, say, rural Kentucky, Occam's razor says, think horses, right? That requires the fewest assumptions.
Right, not zebras.
Not zebras, unless context changes. If your hoofbeats and you're currently on safari in the Serengeti, then zebras are suddenly a very simple, parsimonious explanation. Exactly. Context is everything. But the principle is the same. Start with the explanation that requires the fewest unsported assumptions given your context. It's not about being lazy. It's about saving your mental energy for the more complex stuff by stripping away the highly improbable or unnecessarily convoluted explanations first.
Can you give us a few more quick, relatable examples?
Sure. Okay. Bright flash of light outside your window late at night.
Yeah.
Explanation 1. Lightning from a nearby storm. Explanation 2. An alien spacecraft landing. Occam's razor heavily favors lightning. Why? It requires only one simple, common assumption: there's a storm. The UFO explanation requires a whole cascade of massive, unproven assumptions. Extraterrestrial life exists, they have interstellar travel, they decided to visit your backyard tonight.
Okay, that one's pretty clear. What else?
Your fence is broken. Explanation 1. An old nail finally rusted through and a board fell off. Explanation 2. A moose crashed through it. Which is simpler, depends entirely on whether you live in downtown Toronto or rural Maine, right? Context.
Right. Makes sense.
Or you text a friend and they don't reply for hours. Explanation 1. Their phone battery died, or they're busy. Explanation 2. They suddenly developed a secret grudge against you and are intentionally ignoring you. The first involves fewer assumptions about complex, hidden emotional states. Start simple.
Okay, I can see how that works. Minimizing the drama, maybe. What about applying it to productivity? Especially for people working for themselves, solopreneurs who have a million things that could be doing.
Oh, it's huge there. For anyone managing their own time or business, or even just a busy life, applying Occam's razor means actively, ruthlessly cutting out the noise, the distractions, the tasks that don't really move the needle.
How?
By constantly asking, is this the simplest, most direct, most effective way to achieve my actual goal? It's the thinking behind things like single tasking versus multitasking. Multitasking feels productive, but it often just adds cognitive overhead, switching costs. It's actually less efficient.
So the razor suggests focusing on one thing.
Focusing on the essential things. Prioritize the core activities that deliver 80% of the results.
Yeah.
Streamline your processes. Remove unnecessary steps, tools, meetings. For example, instead of launching a super complex 10-platform social media strategy, the razor would push you to identify the 1 or 2 channels that actually reach your target audience most effectively and pour your energy there. It's about avoiding complexity for complexity's sake in your workflow, trusting that the most direct, parsimonious path to your goal is often the most powerful one. Cut the fluff.
Get to the essence. That makes a lot of sense for productivity, and we can see this principle stretching even further, right, into big fields like economics and even how we think about justice.
Definitely. In economics, you can honestly see Occam's razor having 2 blades, as some people put it.
2 blades.
Yeah. On one hand, you have mainstream neoclassical economics. It often strives for mathematical simplicity, building these elegant models based on simplified assumptions about human behavior, like perfect rationality, perfect information. The goal there is often parsimony in the model structure itself, aiming for broad explanatory power with minimal core assumptions, almost like physics.
Okay, that's one blade. What's the other?
The other blade is maybe more aligned with heterodox economics or behavioral economics. Here, the emphasis is on parsimony for realism. Think of Herbert Simon's idea of bounded rationality.
Meaning humans aren't perfectly rational calculators.
Exactly. We have cognitive limits, imperfect information. So Simon argued that simpler models are better if they are more realistic about these human limitations, rather than building complex models based on the unrealistic assumption of perfect rationality. The push here is for models that are simpler by being more grounded in how people actually behave and make decisions.
So different kinds of simplicity being prioritized in different schools of thought. Interesting. And injustice. You mentioned penal parsimony. What's that about?
That connects directly back to the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian thinker. Penal parsimony applies Occam's razor to punishment.
How?
It advocates for the least amount of punishment necessary to achieve the desired goal, which, for Bentham, was primarily deterring future crime and preventing more harm or pain overall. The idea is, don't inflict suffering beyond what's strictly needed to achieve that preventative effect.
So punishment shouldn't cause more pain than it prevents.
That's the core utilitarian idea behind it. An excessive punishment for a minor crime like, years of hard labor for stealing food would violate penal parsimony because the suffering caused vastly outweighs any potential harm prevented. The razor guides towards the most efficient use of punishment, the minimum needed to maintain social order and deter harmful acts.
But surely applying the simplest explanation in a court case, like deciding guilt or innocence, could be incredibly risky. That feels like a place where simplicity could lead to terrible mistakes.
Absolutely. And this is a massive, critically important caution. Applying Occam's razor naively in a legal setting, just picking the explanation that seems simplest or requires the fewest assumptions about motive or circumstance, can be incredibly dangerous and lead to wrongful convictions.
Why?
Because in justice, the quality and reliability of the assumptions matter far, far more than just the sheer number of assumptions. An expert witness, drawing on years of training in complex evidence, might propose an explanation that seems more complex initially, involving more steps or factors.
Yeah.
But it's based on solid methodology and deep knowledge. That's vastly preferable to a layperson's simpler explanation that ignores crucial evidence or relies on stereotypes. Attributing a complex crime solely to the most obvious suspect or the simplest motive might seem parsimonious, but it can completely miss the real, more intricate truth revealed by thorough investigation.
So the desire for a simple story can actually obstruct justice.
It absolutely can, especially when dealing with complex evidence, multiple actors, or nuanced psychological factors. The razor might be a useful starting point for investigators, maybe, to generate initial hypotheses, but it must always yield to the weight of the evidence and rigorous, detailed analysis in determining guilt or innocence. Lives and liberty are at stake, so superficial simplicity is not a virtue here.
The double-edged evolution and critiques.
Okay, so it's crystal clear that Occam's razor is this incredibly potent tool, a really sharp instrument for finding clarity, for efficiency. But like any sharp tool, it's got that double edge, right? And we really need to understand its limits, its potential downsides. Let's start by digging into how Occam's original idea might be different from how we use the razor today.
That's a really important distinction to make. Occam's original use of his razor was actually quite specific, very rooted in the philosophical debates of his time.
Right, the scholasticism stuff.
Exactly. He was primarily using it as a critical tool against scholastic philosophy, which he felt, as we discussed, was just multiplying entities and concepts unnecessarily. Adding layers like abstract universals, the idea that redness or catness exist as real things separate from individual red objects or cats, when he thought you could explain everything just by looking at individual things and our concepts of them.
So he was pruning back philosophical jargon, basically, aiming for logical minimalism in metaphysics.
Pretty much. He was challenging the addition of unneeded theoretical baggage, things that didn't actually improve the explanatory power of a theory, in his view. You could even argue his own ultimate simple explanation often reduced things back to God's omnipotence, though the razor itself, applied more broadly, wouldn't necessarily support that without specific evidence for divine intervention in a given case.
Okay, so it started as a specific tool for a specific fight. But over the centuries, it clearly morphed into something much broader, didn't it? Like a general principle for scientists and philosophers choosing between any competing theories.
It absolutely did. It evolved from that specific critique into this widely applied scientific and philosophical heuristic, a general guideline for theory selection based on minimizing assumptions across almost any field of inquiry.
But that wider application hasn't gone unchallenged, right? People have pushed back, saying it's too simple, maybe even dangerous sometimes.
Oh, yes. This evolution definitely hasn't been without its critics. The razor has faced opposition from thinkers who see it as too extreme, maybe too simplistic in practice, or even just rash in how it cuts things away. Understanding these counter-arguments is crucial if you want to use the razor wisely.
I remember you mentioning an anti-razor way back from Occam's own era. Someone saying, essentially, no, sometimes you do need more stuff.
That's right. Walter Chatton, he was a contemporary of Occam, another Franciscan theologian. He came up with his own principle, basically an anti-razor.
What does it say?
It went something like, if 3 things are not enough to verify an affirmative proposition about things, a 4th must be added, and so on.
So if simple isn't enough, add more until it is enough.
Pretty much. It's a direct challenge to strict simplicity. It acknowledges that sometimes reality is just complex, and you genuinely need more entities, more conditions, more complex explanations to adequately account for the facts or to properly verify a claim. It's saying, don't let a commitment to simplicity stop you from adding what's truly necessary.
That feels like a direct response to Occam. And it perfectly tees up the ongoing debate around the razor today.
Yeah.
What are some of the main criticisms or counter-arguments we hear in modern science and philosophy?
Well, one huge issue is the problem of hidden complexity.
Hidden complexity.
Yeah. Some theories might look simple on the surface. Maybe they only propose 1 or 2 new things. But when you look closer, they might actually sneak in enormous amounts of unexplained complexity somewhere else.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about the dark matter theory in cosmology.
Okay. Needed to explain why galaxies rotate faster than they should, based on visible matter.
Exactly. So the theory posits one new type of entity, dark matter. Ontologically, that sounds simple, right? Just add one thing.
Seems simple enough.
But to make this dark matter actually work, To make it fit all the different cosmological observations, scientists then have to give it a whole bunch of very specific, currently unknown and rather strange properties. It has to interact gravitationally, but not electromagnetically. It has to clump in certain ways. All that complexity gets pushed behind the curtain into the unknown nature of this single entity.
So the simplicity is a bit of an illusion. The complexity is just hiding inside the definition of the new thing.
It can be, yes.
Yeah.
Or consider a theological explanation, like God did it. Conceptually, that seems incredibly simple. One omnipotent entity explains everything.
The ultimate simple answer.
On the surface. But it immediately invokes staggering hidden complexity. What is the nature of this God? What are its motivations? How does it intervene? None of that is explained, it's just assumed. So the razor, applied rigorously, demands simplicity in the whole explanation, not just in the number of things named.
That's a great point. And then there's the issue you raised earlier. Just defining simplicity in the first place seems really tricky.
Hugely tricky. The subjectivity of simplicity is a major critique. What seems simple to one person might seem convoluted or poorly defined to another, especially when you're comparing theories from different fields or with different kinds of structures.
Like comparing a theory with simple concepts but complex math to one with complex concepts but simple math.
Exactly. Which one is simpler? It often comes down to a subjective judgment call. Or, as we mentioned, you can get that fake simplicity using familiar words or broad concepts that feel simple but actually mask a ton of underlying complexity or vagueness. Trying to find a single, objective, computable measure of simplicity that works for all theories has proven incredibly difficult, maybe impossible. This makes applying the razor more of an art, guided by context and goals, than a strict mechanical procedure.
Okay. What about the link to falsifiability? I think you mentioned Popper earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that simpler theories might be easier or harder to prove wrong.
Yeah, that's another interesting debate. Karl Popper, a major philosopher of science, argued that simpler theories are generally better because they are more falsifiable.
How so?
Because, he argued, a simpler theory usually makes more precise, bolder predictions. It forbids more things from happening. A very specific prediction is easier to test. If the forbidden thing happens, the theory is clearly proven wrong. That's good for science.
Okay, that makes sense. But others disagree.
Others argue the opposite, that sometimes very simple, very broad theories can be harder to falsify because they don't have many specific details or defined exceptions. They might be so general they can accommodate almost any outcome, making them effectively unfalsifiable. The truth probably depends on what kind of simplicity we're talking about. Simplicity of core assumptions versus, say, simplicity of scope or predictive detail.
It's complicated. And maybe the biggest, most fundamental point is just the world itself isn't always simple, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes simple explanations are just plain wrong.
This is arguably the most crucial limitation to keep in mind. The necessity of complexity. The universe, life, human societies, they are often incredibly intricate, nuanced, multi-layered. And in those cases, an overly simplistic explanation isn't just incomplete, it's fundamentally incorrect.
Like the Newton versus Einstein example you gave.
Exactly. Newton's laws of motion and gravity are beautifully simple compared to Einstein's general relativity, and they work incredibly well for everyday stuff, for sending rockets to the moon. But they just fail in certain domains at very high speeds, near black holes. They don't capture the full picture.
So the simpler theory wasn't wrong, just incomplete.
It was incomplete and therefore wrong if applied in those domains where it doesn't hold. It shows that simpler isn't always truer or better if it doesn't account for all the relevant observed phenomena. The razor really only comes into play as a tiebreaker when two theories explain the same evidence equally well. If a more complex theory explains more evidence, or explains the existing evidence better, more accurately, then complexity wins. It has to.
Right, you have to follow the evidence, even if it leads to complexity. And that brings us back to Francis Crick and the warning specifically for biology.
Yes, it's a point worth reiterating because biology is such a prime example of inherent complexity. Crick, and many biologists since, have strongly cautioned against the naive application of Occam's razor in their field.
Because evolution isn't necessarily aiming for simplicity.
Exactly. Evolution tinkers. It builds on what's already there, often resulting in solutions that are functional but seem overly complicated or roundabout from an engineering perspective. Biological systems often display that irreducible complexity, intricate networks where removing one piece causes the whole thing to collapse. In that context, Rigidly demanding the absolute simplest explanation might lead you to fundamentally misunderstand how an organism works or how a disease progresses.
So the tyranny of simple explanations can be a real problem in biology and medicine.
It can be. It might cause researchers to overlook crucial interactions or fail to appreciate the sophisticated redundancy built into living systems. Biology often requires a mindset willing to embrace complexity because that's frequently where the answers lie.
It really sounds like the key is using the razor with wisdom. Knowing its purpose, but also knowing its place. It's a tool, a guide, not some kind of absolute commandment.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's a pragmatic tool, a powerful heuristic, not a rigid law of truth. Its immense value is in guiding us towards models and explanations that are easier to test, more efficient to work with, and less likely to be cluttered with unproven baggage. But it's always, always secondary to the actual evidence.
If the evidence points towards complexity,
You follow the evidence. The moment data contradicts a simpler model or a more complex model provides significantly better predictions or deeper understanding, the razor has done its job as an initial filter, and you move on.
wow, what a journey we've taken today. We've gone right back to the 14th century, to William of Occam and his philosophical arguments, tracing how his idea evolved.
From pruning scholastic excess to becoming this widely used, though sometimes debated, principle across so many fields. And we've really tried to get under the hood, understanding its true meaning, that focus on parsimony, on minimizing unnecessary assumptions, not just chasing conceptual simplicity.
Seeing how it applies
Yeah.
and where the pitfalls lie. And everything from cosmology and medicine to AI, and even just figuring out why your fence is broken.
It's truly clear that Occam's razor is this vital tool for clarity, for cutting through the noise, cutting away the superfluous assumptions. It helps us think more efficiently.
It's a guide towards explanations that are more robust, more testable, more grounded. It's definitely not about just picking the easy answer, but about finding the explanation that makes the fewest speculative leaps while still doing justice to all the facts we have.
Which brings us, I think, to our final thought for you today. As we all try to navigate this incredibly complex world, just overloaded with information, facing intricate problems everywhere we look, Occam's razor remains this really indispensable tool for critical thinking.
It really does. But maybe the true mastery, the real wisdom in using it, isn't just knowing how to apply it.
Yeah.
It's also understanding when to apply it. And, maybe just as importantly, recognizing those moments when the relentless pursuit of simplicity might actually be blinding us
Blinding us to what?
to the deeper, more nuanced truths. The kind of truths that perhaps only embracing greater complexity can actually reveal. It forces us constantly to ask, how do you decide when it's right to shave away the complexity? And when is it essential to lean in and embrace the intricate, sometimes messy, layers of reality?
A question to keep pondering. Thanks for listening to All in All.